What's up, BookTube? It's Leah Cooper, and today I am bringing you my very belated December 2021 reading wrap-up. Probably no surprise, but December was a really good reading month. I think I mentioned at the end of November that I had kind of managed to get over my reading slump, and with that drive to meet Goodreads goals, to end the year strong, to kind of beef up my reading stats for the overall year, I definitely kind of carried that momentum throughout the month of December. In total, I read 10 things. This was a mix primarily of novels and novellas for a total of 3,529 pages, which, quick glance at my spreadsheet, is far and away the best reading month I had all year. Page-wise, and I would say book-wise, there were months earlier in the year when I was still in school where I was reading more things, but those were like articles or very, very short stories or excerpts from books. The fact that I read well over 3,000 pages this month is amazing. I had 3 months, April, July, and August, where I read a little over 1,800 pages, but those were the closest otherwise that I came this month. And that meant that I was on average reading 114 pages per day in the month of December. So like, not only was I reading a lot, but I was actually like reading really, really consistently, especially on the weekends. So we'll try to go in order here. The first thing I finished in December, I finished December 1st, and that was Forestborn by Shannon Hale. This was an audiobook I was listening to. This is the fourth and final installment in the Books of Bayern series. I've been talking about these books in my last couple of wrap-ups because I've been working my way through this quartet, which is a YA fantasy series from the mid-aughts by Shannon Hale. It is ultimately about a group of kind of common folk who befriended the princess in the first book, who was in hiding. They all worked on the castle grounds, and they gain various positions of power once the princess marries the Prince of Bayern at the end of the first book. And each of the subsequent books follows a different character. So in this fourth and final book, we actually follow Razzo's little sister. Razzo is one of the was he a goose boy or was he a duck boy or something in the beginning of the book? He is the point of view character in the third book, River Secrets. So we're following his little sister, who has been mentioned in all of the previous books, and she has the gift of people speaking, which is up until this point been portrayed as something that's only bad and only a corrupting influence. And so this was really a wonderful character study and a wonderful delve into, again, the magic of language, which is a common theme throughout all of these books. I really loved this book. I thought Rinna's point of view was absolutely delightful. I thought she was a very complex and compelling and interesting character. I really loved the relationships she developed with Izzy and Enna and Razzo's girlfriend, who I can't think of her name. She was in the third book. Rinna calls the three of them the Fire Sisters, and it's delightful. She ends up, this book also sees a villain return from the first book, and I can't really say any more because there's just a lot of spoilers for the previous three books. I do think that this series is potentially very underrated YA fantasy series. I mean, I don't know, maybe underrated is the wrong term for it. Maybe it was just like it was popular of its time, but since it's now older and YA publishing moves so fast, it's just not remembered. But I do think that if you are looking for a very solidly written, character-driven, friendship, slightly found family focused fantasy series with some really excellent world building and politics, I think this series is great, and I would highly recommend it. The next thing I finished in December is a book I believe I have mentioned in my previous video about my annual TBR, but that is Jane Steele by Lindsay Fay. This was popular on BookTube several years ago when it first came out. It is a historical novel. a riff, somewhat satire of Jane Eyre. It does follow the beats of Jane Eyre quite closely, but it is about a young orphan named Jane Steele who, instead of being the victim of the horrific, primarily men in her life, as Jane Eyre often is, she is the murderer of those men. And I really, really loved this book. I loved reading about Jane Steele growing up and her various murders. And it's very tongue-in-cheek. It's very beautifully written. My biggest qualm with this book is the author decided to write in a bunch of Sikh characters with around her Mr. Rochester character. He's not Mr. Rochester by name, but he is the Mr. Rochester in this book. And that's fine. I totally commend her for that, not completely whitewashing the reality of this period of English history. My qualms come with the revelation of who the antagonist is. I think Lindsay Fay ultimately has the same problem that Bronte did, in that she throws a woman of color under the bus. And I don't like that, and I don't feel entirely comfortable with that. And it's like this blemish on what would otherwise have been like probably a 5-star read for me. So take that as you will. Like, even now as I'm like talking about it, I cannot get over that part. Like, this is such a, and I feel so conflicted because I liked this book so much. I wish I could shout this book to the rafters. I wish I could put it into everyone's hands if you at all like historical fiction. But like, that ending rubs me the wrong way. So I think I gave this a 4-star because I do love it so much, but also I can't mention it without acknowledging that I do think the author's choice of ultimate antagonist is deeply flawed, especially in the context in what it's riffing off of. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, I am headcanoning Bertha Rochester in much the same way that she is envisioned by Jean Rhys in White Sargasso Sea, for instance. So I am operating with the assumption that she is a woman of color in some way. So there you go. I really liked this, but caveat. But also, there were a lot of really cool Sikh characters. I'm probably mispronouncing that. And Mr. Rochester's quite interesting. And I really, really loved Jane. There's also a hint of a potential, what could have been an FF relationship that wasn't, which I was like, oh, that's like, but also such a missed opportunity, but also like so much angst wrapped up in that. This is complex and this is interesting, and I do want to read more from Lindsay Fay. The next thing I finished was another audiobook, and this was a carryover from much earlier in the year, and that was Velocity Weapon by Megan E. O'Keefe. So I started reading this back in October, got about halfway through it, my loan expired, and I had to wait to get it back from the library. I managed to get it back in December, and I finished listening to it. This was recommended to me, I think, for Space Opera September, because I was looking for audiobook space operas, and this was okay. So I won't lie, at around the 49% mark, I was going to DNF it, because while it was fine, it was kind of boring. Like, it was okay, but it was kind of boring. And then a plot twist happened, literally. Well, I told myself I will give this audiobook one more hour, and if I am still feeling this way about it, I'm going to DNF it. And literally at the very end of that hour, a plot twist happened that made everything about 10 times more interesting. And I was like, fine, I guess I'll listen to the rest of it. My biggest issue with this is that there are multiple POVs, one of them being, well, there's two siblings, right? And one of them is a woman who wakes up on a enemy spaceship. She's the only one alive, and the spaceship, who is a sentient spaceship, tells her that they were part of a doomsday attack by the enemy, and it obliterated the solar system, and now she's the only living person it has been able to recover from an escape pod, and like hundreds of years have gone by. The other POV is supposed to be the current timeline, and it's in the perspective of her brother dealing with the aftermath of her death, and he is a political figure, and she was in the military, and his point of view is mind-numbingly boring. I found him such a boring character. I could not get interested in what he was doing at all. He was a little sanctimonious, but mostly he was just dull as dishwater. And so the fact that every time it would swap back to his POV for an extended period, because in an audiobook it's like it swaps back to his point of view, and it'll be talking in his point of view for over an hour. That is a lot of time to be with someone you find so boring. And I felt that way from start to end. The plot twist did not make him more interesting. It just made me more invested, and it made me want to find out what was happening with the female perspective. I think her name was Xanda. I can't remember the names. It's been a month. But yeah, so take that as you will. I think it's a long book, and to not enjoy half the POV is a bummer. I didn't like the end. The end kind of made me go, oh, seriously? And then my other big thing is with the audiobook. The narrator was a man, and the way he did female voices was the worst. And my partner can verify for this, because they had to listen to the last 2 hours of the audiobook with me because we were driving back home one night from a weekend trip, and the female voices graded so badly. So I don't know if I would recommend this on audiobook. It's part of a series, and to be honest, I don't think I enjoyed it enough to keep going. And that's all I have to say about it. The next thing I finished was a short story anthology, and that is Sword of Destiny by, I'm gonna butcher his name, Andrzej Sapkowski. This is the second Witcher book, and this was okay. I think I gave it a 3 stars. There are quite a few short stories in this short story collection which were the jumping off points or the inspiration for many episodes in season 1 of The Witcher. And I will say the show made changes that I think were for the better. And that was kind of what I took away from reading The Sword of Destiny. I think this collection delves a little bit more into Ciri meeting up with Geralt. And frankly, I think the show did it better. Yeah. So, watch the show. No, I mean, the books are fine. They're not, anything great, but they're easy to read and quite entertaining. And I do still find Geralt kind of an entertaining character. So I'm going to keep reading them for now, and we'll see where it goes. So throughout the month of December, one thing I did, which I found extremely motivating to read, was that I was alternating library book with book off my TBR, because I had a big physical owned TBR to try to get through in that month, and I also had a ton of books out from the library. So that practice of alternating it, man, I just zipped through so many books. I don't know what about it was so compelling, but it truly worked. I'm going to continue trying to do that in 2022 and see if I can kind of keep that momentum up of actually working through my shelves while also getting to read library books. So the next thing I read was something off of my annual TBR, and that was Year One by Nora Roberts. I have since unhauled this book already. I think I mentioned this as well in my annual TBR video that I posted a couple of weeks ago. This was my first book reading Nora Roberts, and it won't be my last, but it didn't inspire a great deal of confidence. So I picked Year One because I genuinely thought that of everything she's written, this seemed like a good place to start, because it's like a paranormal speculative novel, and I like paranormal speculative novels. I'm not like a huge romance reader anymore. I'm especially not a contemporary romance reader, and I have discovered that I'm not necessarily a huge thriller reader. I always thought I was, but thrillers are very hit or miss for me. So I thought, Year One, there's a high likelihood that of everything she's written, this might be something I would like. Unfortunately, I did not like it. I gave this a 1-star book. This was not good. I have kind of two main gripes with this book. A, very cliche. Just every single plot choice was a fucking cliche. Like, awful. Two, authorial voice, I guess. So, and then this one breaks down into 2 parts. A, the language was so purple prose, it was god awful in parts. I was reading bits out of the end, again, to my partner while we were stuck in waiting in a pharmacy, and they told me that I needed, at one point, that I needed to finish the book, or they were going to take it away from me and throw it away so I wouldn't be able to read anymore to them. Like, that is how insufferable some of the writing was. But then on top of it, there was an authorial tick that desperately needs to get edited out. And I don't know if it's something that occurs in other Nora Roberts books. Like I said, I haven't read any of her other books, but she had this thing where a character would say a line of dialogue and then would repeat the line of dialogue. So I wish I do kind of wish I still had the book so that I could read out examples of this, but like they would say, that's just the way it was, period. Just the way it was, period. Or, we all gotta stick together, period. We gotta stick together, period. Like, she would like literally repeat dialogue with like maybe a couple of words adjusted. And this wasn't like one character did this. Every single fucking character in this book repeated every single fucking line of dialogue. There would be multiple repetitions on every single page. And you might do that here and there for emphasis, but this was every single time a character opened their fucking mouth. And it was awful. And I don't know if it's just how Nora Roberts writes, or if it's she's so big they don't edit her enough anymore. I genuinely do not know which it is. But it was terrible, and this book was not good. I don't recommend it. Don't waste your time. Just don't. Because, like, there's other books in the genre that would be more interesting. You know, I was not a huge fan of Trail of Lightning by Rebecca Roanhorse. I thought it was very clearly a debut. Again, kind of cliche, kind of leaned on stereotypes of the genre. But it was a better book than this by, like, leaps and bounds. So, and it was, you know, dystopian supernatural, right? So yeah, no, just no. I will be trying to read the first book in the In Death series this year, just to see if, you know, if I can at least get on with Nora Roberts in another series or another decade, but we'll see. You'll have to stay tuned because I don't know. I just don't know. Moving on. The next thing I finished was another library book, and this was also another audiobook, and that was Elatsoe by Darcy Littlebadger. By contrast to the previous mentioned book, I really liked this. I gave it this like a solid 4.5 stars. I thought this was great. This is YA alternate universe supernatural book about a girl who can call forth ghosts, and she's investigating the murder, death, suspicious death of her cousin. And it's great. I loved this book. It's definitely worth the hype that I've been seeing around BookTube. This is a indigenous story written by an indigenous author. I'm now blanking. I want to say their tribe is... I'm going to look it up. Okay, so Darcy Littlebadger is Lipan Apache, and so are her characters, so it is own voices. And it is so fantastic. I love the way Darcy Littlebadger uses storytelling itself, like oral history storytelling, as a recurring theme and structure within this book. So many times there will be these moments where characters will seg into telling traditional stories, or what are to them traditional stories based on family history. And I just loved it. It's so good, and I would definitely read more from this author. I also think that the world building in this is really cool. So if you have like a teen reader who does like kind of paranormal, supernatural type stories, but that are contemporary, I think this would be a great thing to give them. Then I read another owned physical book, and this was off of my annual TBR, and that was A Life Expectancy by Dean Koontz. Again, another book I have already unhauled. This was my first Dean Koontz. It was given to me as a recommendation from a coworker when I worked at Half Price Books, and I asked for, where should I start with Dean Koontz? Like, give me a Dean Koontz book to read, because I never read him. And like in our horror section, we got Stephen King and Dean Koontz and like V.C. Andrews, right? And so, I wanted to have read him for general knowledge. And a coworker gave me this, especially since I don't like horror. This is not a horror book. This is a thriller. This is like a family thriller, right? It is about a man who on the night of his birth, his grandfather predicts 5 terrible days that will occur in his life. And then each part after that in the book is us following him on one of those terrible days. At the beginning of the book, there's also an incident at the hospital while he's being born. There's another woman who's going into labor, and she dies, and then her husband, who is a clown in a traveling circus, shoots the doctor and the nurse and runs off with the baby. And that will be a recurring thing that comes back, as like their two families are inextricably connected to one another. And this book was a whole mixed bag. So like the entire first section, which follows the first terrible day in his life, is entirely too long. Like, it needed to have 75 pages cut just straight off the top, because not enough happens. Then days like 2, 3, and 4 are all really interesting, and like I was actually starting to quite like the book. And then day 5 runs completely off the rails, and I was kind of like, but it was like, okay, until we got to like the epilogue, which was so saccharine sweet. I have cavities, and it was like completely unnecessary and a little bit ruined the book for me. Overall, I probably would have given it like a 3-star, 3, maybe 3.5, because it was like kind of ridiculous enough to be interesting. However, I have deep reservations about this, and this is why I will not read more Dean Koontz. There was some weird homophobic, transphobic stuff in it that like throwaway homophobia, transphobia from the hero characters that really felt to me like a middle-aged white guy in 2004 trying to be edgy, and I'm not here for that. So, not interested in reading any more Dean Koontz. This was weird, but it was like, I guess not the worst thing to read, and I did read it fairly quickly. I don't know. I don't take that as you will. Not my cup of tea. Honestly, not surprising, right? And then after that, I went for something short, because I got a copy of The Haunting of Tramcar 015. I can never remember the number of the tram. I got this out from the library, but to read this, there are 2 short stories that precede it. So I read the first one, which is A Dead Djinn in Cairo by P. Jelly Clark. I read that. It's like 50 or so pages, and it's available to read on Tor.com. I'll leave a link to it down below if you're at all curious to start this series. This is an alternate universe set in Cairo, early 20th century, like 19 teens. And this first story follows our protagonist Fatma, who is a ministerial investigator. They are investigating the death of a Djinn. So in this world, there was this guy who like somehow kind of tore apart the seams of the universe, and out crawled Djinn and these other mystical creatures who call themselves angels. And this is like a steampunk alternate universe with Djinn and angels and what feels like slight Cthulhian stuff happening beneath the world. And Djinn and Cairo was like, okay. I think I gave it like a 3.5 stars. There were hints of really interesting stuff in the world building. The mystery was just kind of interesting without being like super gripping, super compelling. I think the thing that's so captivating about the series were like the hints of what could be if given more space to develop the world. So, but I've started it and I'm going to continue reading on in that series. I've also read the next short story in the series, which I did like better than Djinn and Cairo, actually. But that was in January, so I'll talk about that in my January wrap-up. Then I read another library book, and that was Atlas Alone by Emma Newman. And this is the 4th book in the Planetfall series, which is like got to be one of my absolute favorite current sci-fi series. I don't know if there's going to be another book in the series because this one came out in 2019 and I haven't seen anything else announced. But this follows the group of survivors who got off Earth at the end of After Atlas. And it follows Carlos's friend, who's the video gamer. And it deals a lot with her being in immersives, which are VR video games in this reality. And it deals with grief and anger and rage. And it is really good. It gets a little ex machina maybe at the end, but it's really good. I highly recommend it. I mean, I just recommend the series in general. They are all like kind of companion novels, but I would recommend reading them in publication order. So that starts with Planetfall, then After Atlas, then Before Mars, then Atlas Alone. Just because there are spoilery things revealed in each of them that go on to influence the next book, basically. So this one was really great. And you can really tell that Emma Newman is a genuine gamer herself. It felt very, very interesting, very real. The other thing I love about this series and Emma Newman's writing is there's always like a mental health issue at the core of her protagonist. And I find the way she handles it and the way she develops that and the way it's almost like a grain of sand that grows this pearl of a book around it. I find that really great, and there's not another author who quite does it the way Emma Newman does it and explores those mental health issues quite how she does, or chooses the mental health issues that are going to be that grain of sand in her character quite the way she does. So I really love them. And then the last thing I finished in the month of December, and the last book I read in the year 2021, and the book that put me up to 52 books to meet my Goodreads goal, was Annihlation by Jeff Vandermeer. So this was one of the books my boyfriend picked for my monthly TBR. And I think this was the one I suggested was the most similar to his favorite film, which is Avatar. And I was very curious to read this book because I have read Born and The Strange Bird by Jeff Vandermeer, and I absolutely love those books. Really love the death. Love the crap out of them. Can't wait to read Dead Astronauts. But I haven't not read the Southern Reach trilogy. I really like the movie. Maybe that's an unpopular opinion, but I think the movie is fantastic. And I'm not going to lie, I think this is one where I kind of like the movie better than this book. Obviously, I have not read the 2 following novels, but there are certain ways the film is organized that I think work so much better than the way it's organized in the book. And I mean, I think the movie and the book are doing 2 somewhat very different things. And I think they're actually exploring 2 very different concepts. And so I don't necessarily think they should be judged against one another. And I don't know how exactly to rate this book without reading the rest of them. Though I also don't know how there is another book to this, because like the ending felt very definitive, frankly, for what it is. It must follow other characters. I don't know. This fell a little bit into the trap where you have 2 locations and a character just keeps running back and forth between those 2 locations. And you're just kind of like, really? That's what we're going to do? That's what we're going to spend 100 pages doing, is running back and forth between 2 locations? It always kind of feels like retreading a lot to me. This was not scary at all. Like, I felt a deep, like, existential dread while watching the film, and I didn't get that at all while reading this. Some of it was just kind of silly. Parts of it felt less profoundly disturbing, like, but also more so. Like, I can't decide if the bear in the movie or the bear in the book is more distressing. The slug creature in the tower was kind of just, what? It was very lull until she saw the lighthouse keeper. And then I was kind of like, okay, that's cool. That's a cool moment. I don't know. This did not leave me feeling wowed. It's probably something I'm going to need to read again, I think. Possibly, like I said, I am going to read the rest in this trilogy because I just don't know where Vandermeer is going to take it, and I'm curious. But I do think I probably need to just read this a couple more times to dig more deeply into the concepts that Vandermeer is trying to explore in this. So, yeah. First impression was like a 3.5 star. It didn't wow me. It really didn't wow me in comparison to Born. Because I think that's the thing I would rather, like, compare it to, is the other books by Jeff Vandermeer that I have read. It really doesn't wow me compared to The Strange Bird. The Strange Bird is phenomenal. Born is phenomenal. So this was just, I don't know. I don't love it. And I thought I would. So yeah, that was my reading for the month of December. I read a lot of stuff. Like, going back over this, I'm actually once again very impressed with myself. Like, yeah, that was a lot of pages. December is going okay, but I don't think it's going quite that well page-wise. I'm currently reading a quite chunky book that I have slowed down on, and it has overall slowed me down, but reading is going okay. And I think December overall was a pretty decent reading month. I had a couple of highs, a couple of lows. I would say overall it was pretty average, but it felt really great to be reading at this volume because, like, I was genuinely enjoying the process of doing that. So anyways, let me know if you've read any of these books. You can go ahead and, I don't know, tear me a new one over my meh reaction to Annihilation, because I'm sure some people will. And I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye.